In this video, we're going to look at how to do an assembly and animation in Blender, similar to the one I did in my Assembly 4 video, which I'll link to above, so that you can see how to take these models out of FreeCAD, put them into Blender, and achieve a similar result. I believe a little bit easier than it is to do it in Assembly 4, and there's some good reasons you might want to do it in Blender. There are other good reasons why you might want to do it in Assembly 4, but this way you have the choice. Okay, so I'm going to keep this intentionally simple. I don't want to do anything I don't need to do to get you into Blender and animating this part. So you'll remember the rod from the animation here in FreeCAD. So I'm just going to select that. I'm going to export it, and I'm going to export it as rod STL. I already did it once, that's why it exists there already. So I'm just going to overwrite that one. And then I'm going to open up the main body. You'll remember the main body from the prior one. If you haven't watched that video, go ahead and watch that one. The animation in Assembly 4. And you'll see how we do all this in FreeCAD. I'll put a link to it up top. So I'm going to select this main body, and I'm going to export that. The main body STL, and say yes, I'm going to overwrite that. So that's all I'm going to do in FreeCAD. For now, what we're going to do is we're going to open up Blender, and we will use Blender to create the animation. So the version I use is version 2.92. That's the very latest version that you can download, and it will allow you to do everything that I'm doing here. I think what I'm doing will work in older versions. You may see some some slight differences in the interface, but for the most part, everything I'm doing here will work in the older versions. So I would go with this 2.92. It's the latest release, and it works really well. So let's get started. So this is Blender. If you haven't downloaded it already, you need to go to the Blender website and download your copy. It's free, it's open source, and on the face of it, it's very complicated, but if you stick with the basics, I promise you, it's no more complicated than FreeCAD. Once you get used to it, then you can start looking at other aspects of it. Of course, there's a million buttons and things to play with, but don't be intimidated. Give it a go. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So inside Blender, I just picked a general. When you go in, when you first start Blender, it's going to ask you what type of file do you want to work in. You can just say general. And what it'll do is it'll show you this default cube. We're going to use a default cube just to get our size, our scale right. And what I'm going to do in this animation is I'm just going to import the parts and scale them roughly to the size of that cube, which is way bigger than the parts are. I'm not going to go for scale size with dimensions. You can do that in Blender, but you don't need to if you're just going to do a quick assembly. Also, if we make things about the same size as this cube, then our camera and our lighting will all work for those parts. Now, I'm not going to do a render of this assembly. I'm just going to do the assembly and let you guys play with it after that. So first thing I want to do is to bring in my main body. So I'm going to say File and Import an STL. So File, Import STL. Then I need to navigate to where I saved those STLs. I saved them in here under Assembly. So the main body, I'm going to import it. Now the important thing is when you import something, you can see right now that that has imported it at a scale that is massive. It's huge. And I don't really care, except for I don't want this to be bigger than the default cube because of the camera and the lights and all that stuff. So I'm going to scale it down. To scale it, you just hit S, and then you just move your mouse, and it will scale. And if you watch in the middle there, well, actually, I'm going to zoom in a bit so you can see a bit better. If you watch in the middle, you'll see the default cube is still there. You see the camera, you see the lights, you see how massive this thing was when it came in. That cube is 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. So this is literally as massive. We don't want it to be massive. We can go down to sort of that size. I think that's fine. And again, I'm not worried about what the scale is. If you look over here, you can actually see the scale that I scaled it down to 0.022, and I scaled it down evenly in the X, Y, and Z. I don't care about any of that. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just doing something that looks right. This is not supposed to be a scale model. Now I want to get rid of this default cube. So what you can do in this object mode, you can select parts. So if you look at that, the main body is now selected. If you look at this, the cube is now selected. To delete something in Blender, you just hit X. It'll pop up for a confirm. Delete is gone. So now I want to bring in a rod, and I'm going to just bring it over this way. What's going to happen is it's going to come in the middle, but it's going to be massive. So let's do that first. So we'll bring it in, select the rod, import, and as you can see, the rod is massive. So I'm going to say scale, and again, I'm just doing S to scale. I'm going to zoom in a bit closer. You can see the rod is bigger than the main body at the moment. So S again, and just keep going down till it gets to a size where I'm happy with it. I actually flipped it over there, so we'll fix that. And it's way too big, so I'm going to scale that down. I go here, you can see where it's sitting in there. Scale again. There we go. And that's about the size that I want it. And I'll show you how to move it as well in a second. But for now, we're going to sit with it there. And it's actually the other way round to the way that we want it. So I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees in the X and Y plane. So just like FreeCAD, we're in space here. So we have our Y plane. How do I know that's Y? If I look up here, you can see the Y is actually green, the X is red, and the Z is blue. So the green corresponds to the Y, and the red corresponds to the X. Now, if I'm turning 180 degrees, it doesn't matter if I do it in the X or the Y. So to rotate in Blender, it's just R. And then you can tell it which axis you want to rotate on. So I'm going to just say X, and I'm going to rotate it like that. And if you look over to the right, you can see that I rotated it 179 degrees. So what I'm going to do is pop that up just one more. 180 degrees. So there we have the rod is now the right way up for the way I wanted it. And it's roughly the right dimension. And okay, so I'm going to select that rod, Shift D and X, and that says I want to duplicate it in the X direction. And I'm going to go back to the middle one, Shift D, X, and move that in the other direction. And if I look from the top, I can see roughly where I am in terms of being in the center there. That one's not bad, that one's not bad. This one I think needs to move down. So to move something, it's just G for grab, and then X. And I can just bring it to this roughly in the middle there. That looks pretty good. You can see actually, if you look at the ends of this, you can see that we have a view where you're not seeing it straight on. You're showing it from a bit of perspective. So that's why it looks like it's not quite lined up. But if you look from underneath, you'll see it's actually pretty close. So that's close enough for us for our animation. Now, when we want to animate this, we can decide if we want to start with them all even, or we can move up and down. If I want to move these two outside ones down, for instance, I'm going to select the first one, hold down Shift, select the second one. Then I'm going to say G for grab, and I want to just move it in the Z direction, so Z. So I'm going to hit Z, and then I can just pull them down to wherever I want them to be to get started. So now I have my start point, which is roughly what I think I had in the FreeCAD animation. Now to animate something in Blender, it's very easy because you can use keyframes, what they call keyframes, to tell it where it's going to be at any one time. So you really only need to have a couple of keyframes and you're all set. In this particular view, so we're in the layout view, we're going to go down to this line here, and we're just going to pull it up a little bit. And now if you look here, I have this, what looks like a timeline, or is a timeline. And if I press play, it'll play that. Nothing's moving because I haven't told it to move anything yet, but that's playing each frame. And in our case, I don't think we need 250 frames. That's what it defaults to. So if you look here, you have a start frame and an end frame. So I can roll the end frame back. And all I'm doing is I'm clicking on the number and then just move my mouse to the left, and I'll roll it back. So let's say we just go with 100 frames. We'll just work inside of there and go with that. So you can also, if you look at these little arrows on the end, you can move it up and down by 1. So when I rolled back, it went to 99. I just clicked that right arrow and it went up again. So now this bar, the play and pause bar, it has this arrow with a line on it. That'll take you back to the beginning. So that's where we are at the beginning. Now what I want to do is I want to say with these here, this is their start point. So I want to tell it that it's going to be starting there. So on this right hand side here, you can see all these different icons. This one with the square inside some, I think they're brackets or something. This, it pops up there, it says object properties. So that tells me the location of the object. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply my scale. So everything is scaled. I'm just going to go ahead and apply that by saying I'm going to select the main body, hold down Shift, select my 3 rods, say Object, and Apply, and Scale. So now you can see the scale goes back to 1. And I can say Object, Apply, Rotation. So now my rotation is 0. And then I'm going to say Object, Apply, Location. And all my locations are 0. The reason I've done that is just to make everything simple. It's all zeros instead of being all those odd numbers that were on there. Now what I want to do is select my rod. And you can see when I select different rods, if you watch here, you can see this is rod 3, this is rod 1, and this is rod 2. We can rename those if we want to. We don't have to. It's not complicated enough to rename. So all we need to know is that rod 1 is the one in the middle. Also, you can see from here, you can select those bodies. So I can select rod 3, rod 2, rod 1. And I actually have the original rod there, which I am going to hide. There we go. I had 2 rods there. I managed to duplicate it in the same place. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tell it this is where I want this rod to start from. So if I select this rod and I select this point over here, these are my keyframes. And you'll see that over here, these little keyframers come on. So that says that rod is going to be there at frame 1. So I'm going to do the same thing for this rod. Keyframes for the first frame. Then I'm going to move it to the 40th frame. And now I'm going to say this rod is going to be moving up. So I'm going to actually I'm going to select this rod and this rod because I want them to go in unison. And I'm going to say G for grab, Z for the direction I want to go in, and I'm going to move them up to here. And just click. And now you can see the Z direction has changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select each rod and click the keyframe. Select the rod, click the keyframe. Now, if I run this animation, you'll see that when it goes back to 0, they start from there and they come up. It automatically figures out where you want to get to and how it gets there. So I can go back to frame 40. If I use this arrow with this keyframe indicator on it, I'll just jump back to that keyframe. And then I'm going to say, select this guy and give him G and Z and pull him down to where I want him to be. And then give him a keyframe. Now, if I wanted it to be the exact same amount of offset as this guy, I can set these numbers if I want to, but I'm just doing it by eye because it's very simple. So if you watch now, it starts there, pops up, and then it stops. Well, we want it to go back to the beginning. So we can say, move this to 90 and simply change this to 0 and hit the keyframe. Select the next one, change that to 0, hit the keyframe. Select that one, change that to 0. Remember, we started at 0, so we know that's back where we started from. And now if we run it, you'll see that they move up, and then they move down, and then they're going to move up, and then they move down. And that's simply how you get to an animation. Now, one of the advantages of Blender is I can turn this around. I can look at it from any angle and have that run. We can see what it looks like. We can also look at it through the camera view. If you remember, we have the camera view, and we can run that up and down that simply. So now I want to do some bonus footage. If all you wanted to do was the animation, you've already seen that, and I'm not going to do any more with this main body and these rods. We're going to leave the animation right there. It's basically what happened in FreeCAD, but that's how you do it in Blender. Now I'm going to show you the physics part. So you saw at the beginning of this video, I showed some video of a ball hitting two blocks, and that ball moves the blocks, and that's the physics part of Blender. And I think that is really a powerful tool, particularly if you are simulating something with parts that you've designed in FreeCAD, because you can do that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to do that physics part. It's fairly simple, and it will walk you through how to create stuff in Blender. And again, baby steps. If we do it a little bit at a time, you'll soon become familiar with Blender as you have with FreeCAD. So from here, from where we are, I'm going to get out of the camera view. I'm just going to start a new file. So I'm going to say new, general. Again, there he is, that default cube. what I'm going to do, when you start a file, the default cube is actually in the middle of the space, and I want to bring it up to the top. So I'm going to turn on this little magnet up here. This does snapping. You can play with this, but I'm just going to turn it on for now. And I'm going to do a G to grab this cube and a Z to move it up. And I'm going to bring it back down, just drop it there. And now if you look, it's sitting on that surface. So that's all I wanted to do. I'm going to turn my magnet off for now. And we're going to duplicate that. We're going to have two cubes because we're going to create something similar to what I showed at the beginning of the video. So the next thing we want is a floor. So we're going to add a mesh, and it's going to be a plane. And we're going to use that scale command again. So we just hit the S and we drag it out and make it a decent size so that we've got some floor. And then we want to add a ball. So again, it's add mesh. And in this case, we're going to say a UV sphere. So we're just adding a ball. Everything adds in the middle there. So we're going to G and we're going to Z. We'll just move it up a bit. And we're going to G and X. I'm going to just move it to that side. Just put it there. And simply, that ball is floating in the air at the moment. And that cube is sitting there. We want a little bit of space behind it because we're going to knock the cube. And if we want to rotate that cube a little bit so it's not face on, so we're going to click on the cube, R, and then Z because we just want to rotate around the Z axis. And we're just going to drag it around. So we'll put it there. Now what we're going to do is we are going to add a second cube. So Shift D for duplicate and Z to go up. And we're just going to sit it up in space. So it's sitting up in space at the moment. And the reason I'm doing that is because when you do these animations, if you have them overlapping, when you turn it on, it will jump up in the air because it will try and react to the fact that it's overlapping because you can't overlap in space. So it really does that. So I'm going to take that cube and I'm going to rotate that one in the Z axis. I'm just going to turn it a little bit so they're not dead straight. I'm going to turn on my magnet again and I'm going to move it down and settle it on top of that guy. Wait, that's not right. I see what it's doing. So it's trying to take that center point and put it on the top. So now it is overlapping by a half. Well, I know these cubes are 1 meter high. So what I'm going to do is I can just type in 3. And now that cube's sitting dead on top. So there, everything is fine as it stands. So now if I run the animation, I've got nothing happening. And I'm going to pull it up again like we did with our other animation. We're just going to pull up so we can see that timeline. And nothing is happening. And our timeline is 250 frames. I only want the timeline to be about 60. So I'm going to type in 60 there. You can see now if I press play, it's only going to play 60 frames. Okay, so I'm going to set this cursor back to the beginning. And I'm going to take this ball and we're going to add some physics to this ball. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here. If you look on these icons, I showed you before that this one is the object properties. This one, it looks like, I don't know what it is, a rod with some kind of movement around it, I guess, is physics properties. So if I click on that and I say, this ball is going to be a rigid body. So I just click rigid body, don't do anything else. Now, if I press play, see how the ball falls to the ground? Or it actually falls into space. If I turn this way and keep running, you'll see it'll fall into space. Now the reason it's falling into space is gravity. So gravity is taking over, and this plane doesn't have any physics, so the ball just drops right through it. So if we make the plane a rigid body, but we're going to make the plane a passive rigid body, otherwise the plane will just drop down in space as well. So we're going to make it passive, which means it is not going to fall down, it's just going to stay still. So now if I run the animation, the ball will fall down and stop on the plane. Great. So how's it going to hit those cubes, we wonder? Well, first things first, we got to make the cubes have some physics as well. So we're going to click on that cube, make it a rigid body, click on that cube, make it a rigid body. I'm not going to touch anything else in the rigid body part. So now if I run, those cubes shouldn't move anywhere because they're already sitting on that plane and they're sitting on top of each other. So gravity's not making a move. The only thing that's moving is the ball through gravity. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the beginning of our animation. So now we have our ball. We're going to select the ball, and from the physics we are going to select animated and select that keyframe, and then from the properties for its location in X we're going to select the keyframe. Now what we're going to do is move over to frame 10, and we're going to say for that ball G and X, so we're going to move it along the X, bring it up close to there, and we're going to keyframe that position, and we're going to keyframe our animation, but we're going to turn it off at that point and keyframe it. So now what's going to happen is when we run this simulation, we should see the ball move and hit the blocks. So the ball moves, hits the blocks, and you notice the blocks are moving because they're rigid body too, and that's basically how you do it. Now you'll see that in my animation, my ball was all shiny, reflective ball. I'm going to leave you to figure that out. There's plenty of information on how to do that. You can also make this ball more round, less golf ball-y looking. You can do all of those things. And of course, if we put it in the camera, we can position it properly too, because if we look at our camera now, our camera's in the not maybe the optimal angle, because we're only looking at that square, so we're only going to see that piece happen. So I showed you how to position the camera in the video where I showed you how to do rendering of a FreeCAD model, so you can take a look at that too. If you want to see more Blender ideas and information and integration with FreeCAD, doing things with FreeCAD models, leave me a comment below, and I'll certainly, if people are interested, I'll certainly do more stuff with Blender so that you can see how that works. But for now, I just wanted to show you some simple stuff just to pique your interest, get you going. There's lots of videos out there on Blender. I'm absolutely not an expert in it, but I can sort of hack my way through. But if I get stuck, I generally go and look for some YouTube videos on Blender, because there are a lot of people out there who are very good at it. And the reason I want to show it to you guys is because I think there's a lot of synergy between FreeCAD and Blender. Not only that they're both free and open source software, but the fact that you can so easily take a FreeCAD model, bring it into Blender, do all kinds of things with it, including adding it into videos or doing all kinds of exciting stuff with it. So again, if you're interested in seeing more Blender stuff, please leave me a comment below. If you want to see more FreeCAD stuff, you can comment that too. And by all means, subscribe, give this video a like, and I'll prepare the next one.